Welcome to Innovation Out of Failure, where we talk to people about their careers and, most importantly, about the challenges they have faced that actually end up making them more successful innovators in the end. I am Andrew Lyon, Dean of the Fowler School of Engineering at Chapman University, and I'm your host for this series. This week, we're speaking with Stephen Fleming. Stephen's an entrepreneur and investor, and he spent the better part of his career helping people take new ideas and grow them into robust businesses. Today, we are talking with Stephen Fleming. Stephen, welcome to Innovation Out of Failure. This is a class where students learn from really, really smart people what it's like to do really, really cool things, and also maybe learn a little bit about the things that have gone on in their lives that have led to them to those really cool things. So, again, thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here. Good to see you again.
So, Stephen, you and I met quite some time ago back in Atlanta when we were both at Georgia Tech, but you actually spent some time in New Jersey before that, which is my old stomping grounds.
Okay, cool. Mm-hmm.
You've done lots of amazing things. I don't want to rehash your whole CV, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about where you started and how you ended up where you are today.
Let me try to do the really short version. Georgia Tech engineering undergraduate, went to work at Bell Laboratories back when that meant something, which it won't to any of your students because they're all way too young. But back when Bell Labs was a magical place. That got me into the telecom business. I stayed in telecom for about a decade, worked for big companies, did a startup, went spectacularly broke, went back to my former big company. That's an interesting way to get a promotion, by the way, is leave and come back. Did two more startups, did much better. Decided I liked the financial leadership side of startups better than the sitting in the lab and writing code. So got into the venture capital business, raised 3 funds out of Atlanta, managed those for a while, did reasonably well, made our investors some money, tried to retire at the age of 40, turned out to have 0 retirement skills, started hanging around at Georgia Tech where you and I met, and ran entrepreneurship, innovation, commercialization, several other manufacturing support organizations, medical devices, healthcare software, ran kind of the department of everything else at Georgia Tech. We weren't doing research and we weren't teaching. We were doing all of the outreach stuff. And got recruited out of there here to Tucson, Arizona, where I'm doing some of the same things for University of Arizona and also doing some consulting work on the side. So that's what I was doing earlier today that we chatted about.
So if I could just ask you to elaborate a little bit upon that kind of flow back and forth between a large company, entrepreneurship, and a university setting, like how is that flow for you? Those are some pretty big gears to switch.
They are. They're very different tracks. I'd say in general, people are people. So learning how to manage people and learning how to manage both up and down your chain is a common skill set to any organization. That's large company, small company, government, military, whatever you need to do. And yes, even if you're CEO of a startup, if you've taken venture capital investment, you still have bosses. It's your board of directors because they can fire you. So learning how to manage people and manage with people is a common skill set. I'd say the biggest difference with a small company or a small organization, the clock just ticks a lot faster. When you're working at a Georgia Tech or you're working at a University of Arizona, the clock ticks in semester terms. When you're working at a startup, it's like I have to meet payroll every 2 weeks. And if I don't do the right thing this week, I can't make payroll next week. And so the feeling of time flying by is way more intense at a startup company, which is good and bad. It is more stressful. But also you don't, I shouldn't say, you won't go down as many false alleys. You will go down the same number of false alleys. That's what we're going to talk about in this discussion. But you figure it out faster and you have to do mid-course corrections more quickly. Whereas in a large organization, in a government organization, for example, you can pursue a failed or flawed strategy for, in some cases, years before there's any consequence. So that's one of the reasons startups make great laboratories for innovation, because you're going to learn very quickly what's working and what's not working. And if you're smart, you'll do more of what's working and less of what's not working. But we'll talk about sometimes when I wasn't very smart.
Well, I mean, I would argue that I've seen some people in higher ed pursue bad ideas for decades. So I think you're generous by saying a few years.
It could be decades, yeah. So yeah.
So this class is also about, as we said, innovation, right? And so innovation is this really, I think, very fleeting term. There's some textbook definitions, but goodness, depending on where you're coming from, it has super different meanings. So what does that mean to you? What does that word mean to you?
Yeah, it's actually when I give presentations on this, I actually have some slides which are just, book covers from Amazon with the word innovation, and there are hundreds of them. Even Innovation for Dummies. There really is. There is that book. I should buy a copy just to hold up as a prop. It is probably one of the most abused terms in American business today. 20, 30 years ago, the abused term was excellence. Everything had to be excellent. Now it's innovation. Everything has to be innovation. I've spent a lot of my career in and around universities, both in the venture capital world, investing in university startups, and then working at universities in the innovation ecosystem. And the definition that I found most useful in that context is by Jeff Nicholson. He's the guy who invented the Post-it note at 3M. And his definition, I think, works very well in an academic context because he says, research is the transformation of money into knowledge. And we're good at that at universities. Give us more money, we will deliver you more grad students, more papers, more posters, more knowledge. Innovation is the transformation of knowledge into money. And I love that being the reverse side of the coin, because in many environments, not just academia, people think that an invention is an innovation, or a patent, or a publication, or a Nobel Prize is an innovation. And by Jeff Nicholson's definition, no. Those are interesting and they're intellectually valuable, but it's not an innovation until somebody writes you a check. That somebody is buying a product or a service that's based on that invention. And a lot of the activities in large companies and a lot of the activities in academia don't necessarily focus on that payoff. What do we do to turn it into something where there's a category of customers that say, I have a problem, you're solving my problem, I will pay you for that solution. That's innovation. And just being new isn't good enough.
So to go off of that final point, just being new isn't good enough. One of the things that you definitely see in digital transformation these days, right? And so we've been doing digital transformation for decades now when it comes right down to it. But I think that that's even accelerating at this point. I see a lot of things that look like innovation that aren't even new. They're just repackaged, right? What are your thoughts on that kind of repackaging that goes on so often? I mean, right now we're on Teams. We were talking before we started recording about Zoom. Those are really repackaging of very, very similar technologies, which is innovative.
Well, and there's a question about, is there any innovation involved there? And if so, does it matter? You can build very successful businesses with zero innovation. If you happen to open, the right restaurant on the right corner with the right menu and people flock to you, that can be a very nice business. There's nothing innovative about opening a restaurant. You look at the automobile business. I mean, arguably the only innovation that's happened there in the last, a long time, is Tesla. And they've built a very large, I would not say yet very successful business. They've sold a lot of vehicles. I think they've stuffed a lot of dollar bills in the glove box of each one they've shipped out the door. I don't think they're making money. But they've truly brought a new way of looking at building vehicles to a very hidebound traditional business. That being said, Honda's making a lot of money. Toyota's making a lot of money. I mean, they're ringing very small changes, and as you say, repackaging the same pieces. And okay, now the screen in the dash is 11 inches rather than 5 inches. But fundamentally, you could time machine somebody out of 1960 and plop them down in any current internal combustion engine vehicle, and they're perfectly safe to drive that around town. Drop them in a Tesla, they're going to have a learning curve.
Right.
It's a different driving experience. Innovation is one of those things which it is neither necessary nor sufficient to
Mm.
build a successful company. It's usually nice to have in the mix. Where you really find a lot of the community focusing on innovation is in the subset of startup enterprises that want to raise external capital. So if you're going after venture capital investment, going after angel investment, I've been a venture capitalist. I'm currently an angel investor. And, we want to see curves go up and way up to the right. You want to see a nonlinear acceleration in the enterprise value that you put in $1 and it's worth 10 or 20 or 100. You don't ever get that in the restaurant business. If you put in $1 and get out $1.05, yay, you're a winner.
Mm-hmm.
$1 and get out 95 cents, that's probably normal, and you'll eventually go out of business. But if you're raising venture capital, you need that nonlinearity. It's really tough to get a nonlinear positive return unless there's something truly innovative. And everyone loves to beat up on Uber and to some extent on Lyft. But you look at what Uber did. They didn't invent the car. They didn't invent the GPS. They didn't invent the iPhone. They didn't invent any of these things. But they repackaged those into something which I truly would call innovative. And millions of people said, I'm willing to pay you for that solution to my problem of getting across town. And they've created, billions of dollars of market value with that. So yes, those investors got that nonlinear kick in valuation. You'll see a lot of focus on that. When I'm wearing my venture capitalist hat, I want to know, what's so different about what you're doing that you can displace an incumbent, that you can take, Susie is spending money on vendor A, and Susie's going to stop spending money with vendor A and start spending money with you. The activation energy to make that happen is usually pretty high.
Right.
So that's where a lot of times innovation becomes the carrot that gets people motivated.
So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the other part of this class, which is this word failure. And what a lot of students, I think, are just coming into is seeing people like yourself who've been tremendously successful in a lot of different ways and trying to understand what makes you tick that's related to what has not been so successful. So the way I like to phrase it, and the way I like to ask it is, what was your most important failure?
Well, I have a lot to choose from, and that fact is something that I hope your students can appreciate, because your students are coming from very bright backgrounds. They've mostly done very well in school. I'm assuming they're doing very well at Chapman. And honestly, failure is not a big part of the academic experience of most students. The place, honestly, where most young people learn failure is through sports. Look at me, I didn't play sports. I didn't get that kind of experience. I was in the computer lab every evening. And the cruel hard fact is, most things that you try in life, you're going to fail. As a venture capitalist, where I was being paid a lot of money to invest other people's funds, guess what? The kind of rule of thumb is, okay, you make 10 investments, 6 of them will be complete and utter failures, like write-offs, like you put in millions of dollars and you get out 0. And I'll talk about one of those. Half that many, say 3 of them, you'll get your money back. You put in $1 million, you work very hard, you put years of effort into it, and at the end of the day, you get $1 million out. I could have put that in a savings bond and gone to the beach. And then one of them will catch the brass ring, and you make 10 times or 20 times or 30 times the amount you invested. And if you run those numbers, that actually can be a very good way to make a living. That actually can be very profitable. But the failures are an inevitable part of it, because no one is smart enough to only make good investments. No one. I'll digress a little bit because you're in Los Angeles. There's this great story about when Sony bought Columbia Pictures, and Columbia was just hemorrhaging money. And so Sony sends over all these forensic accountants from Tokyo to come examine books of Columbia Pictures and to figure out, how can you lose so much money? And they finally have the big board meeting with, like the chairman of Sony and, all these, huge senior executives. And they give their presentation. They say, we've examined the last, 10 years worth of history of the movie business, and we've learned the mistake you're making is you should only invest in those movies that make money. and think about saying that in a venture capital context. You should only invest in successful businesses. That's not the way it works. We invest, when I was actively a VC, we invest in very early stage companies. We do our due diligence. We do our best analysis of the markets, of the technology, of the people, of all the risks that are involved. And at the end of the day, we make a bet. And just like Las Vegas, most of the time that bet comes up snake eyes. Sometimes it happens very quickly. Sometimes it happens very slowly. There's a great line. I'm probably the only working venture capitalist that used to quote Leo Tolstoy on a regular basis. But the opening lines of Anna Karenina are, I'm misquoting, but it's close, is every happy family looks the same. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. So every time you get a failure, there's something particular about that one, why that one failed, even with all the knowledge of all the previous failures. But there's always a new creative way to fail. And so that's the entrepreneurial experience. Now, the difference between being a venture investor and being the entrepreneur is, as a venture investor, I'll have my finger in 8 or 10 or 12 startups on the gamble that one of them will become hugely successful. And if you do your job well, it is, and we did our jobs well, and we did okay. As the entrepreneur, you're all in on one of those. And so, yes, if it's hugely successful, you make way more money than I do. I mean, right. You look at the CEOs of these successful companies and they can buy Peru. But if you're in one of those that just breaks even, maybe you could have been working for the phone company and having health insurance for those 3 years. Or if you're in one of the 6 out of 10 that fails, you had a very expensive lesson. And I do want to make sure we get to that in this conversation, is that learning from failure is something which the United States, from its earliest days, has embraced that as kind of part of the corporate ethos in America. And in most of the world, they don't get that.
Interesting.
There's a few countries that do. Israel does, because their country was born under very hostile circumstances. Some other countries are beginning to figure it out. China has got a different perspective on it that's really not relevant to a market economy. But the flip side is, my wife's from Brazil, and I used to go down and teach entrepreneurship for a workshop every spring in Brazil because it was a nice way to get a free trip to Brazil. And I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it was a university, a very good, probably one of the top 5 universities in the country. And we'd have these great discussions and these great intellectual conversations about the projects people were working on. And at the end of the day, I challenged them. So are you going to start this company? Well, no. I'm going to get a job at IBM, or I'm going to get a job at Monsanto, or I'm going to get a job at the federal government or state government, whatever. They're going, why? Well, the concept of being in a risky endeavor and failing is seen as a moral blight. So there are countries in Latin America where if you are director of a company that goes bankrupt, you can no longer vote. It's like being a felon. Brazil's not that bad, but in Brazil, if you're the director of a company director or officer of a company that goes bankrupt, you personally, like your checkbook and your mortgage, you are liable for the salaries of those employees for 2 years after shutting the company down.
Wow.
And so guess how much appetite there is for doing entrepreneurial activities in a system like that? Not very much. United States figured out bankruptcy. And, the idea of, from the very earliest days of the Republic, if you were in Boston and you got behind on your bills, well, Mabel, saddle up the horse. We're going over the mountains and we're going to set up in the Ohio territory. And you started a clean slate. We still have that with bankruptcy law. And, you look at an Elon Musk, he had a startup in South Africa. He went broke. In that culture, you're never going to get investment again. You're never going to get anybody to put you in a position of trust again. You're done. He moved here. Look at the value he's created. So you don't always, and the point I'm trying to get, this is a long digression, I apologize. The point is you don't always get it right the first time. Elon didn't get it right the first time. Steve Jobs didn't get it right the first time. Bill Gates arguably didn't get it right the first time, but then that's Bill Gates. Other stories there. But dial it back a notch to not the magazine cover people, but people who have built, a business that's doing, $10 million in revenue, has got 120 employees, maybe a couple of branch offices, is throwing off cash. The founders are living very nice lifestyles, kids in private school, boat down at the harbor. If you go talk to those people, you'll find out frequently that's not their first company, maybe their second or their third or their fourth. And the fact that in this country you get that chance for second chances, third chances, fourth chances, that's something the rest of the world doesn't take for granted. And that's my belief. That's one of the reasons why so many people in the world want to move here, even with all the issues we've got and all the problems we've got. Still, the opportunity here is so much stronger because you can screw up, have a failure, learn from that, and keep innovating.
Interesting. So I guess I hadn't appreciated kind of how profound the risk is of failure so many other places. If we bring it back
in England, if you have declared bankruptcy, you will never again get a loan from a bank, period. Personal or business. You are no longer creditworthy in the United Kingdom. And guess what? If a smart person in that environment understands the ecosystem, they're going to get a job at the power company or go get a job with a university. They're going to not, put everything out, on the table and say, I'm going to take this risk because the downside is permanent. Whereas here it's like, okay, one of my very first startup company, I didn't found it, but I joined early on, and we got it up to 120 employees, and I took it down to 19 before I laid myself off. In my next role, I explained that we completely failed for lots of reasons. But I had a very expensive education. I mean, that was way more valuable than an MBA. Now, it cost me, a couple years salary, and, I had a bunch of equity that I mentally, was turning into a boat and a helicopter in my head, and it turned out to be waste paper. But, I bounced back very quickly and, did something else. And, next time around I was more successful. The investors, and we had a really good set of a syndicate of venture capital investors, they lost, we sold the company for 10 cents on the dollar. They put in 22 million, they got out 2. Okay, that's a failure. They had a portfolio big enough they didn't care. Well, I won't say they didn't care. They had a portfolio big enough that it didn't hurt them that badly because we were just one of those half dozen out of 10 that didn't make it. I assume in each of their cases they had one that did really well, and they went on to raise their next fund and the next fund and the next fund. But that's there's things, and I think this is part of what you're trying to teach your students. There's things you can only learn from failure. It's Mike Tyson had this great quote. Everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. It's true. I mean, you're out there in the marketplace, and the marketplace has a vote, and sometimes they don't vote for you. And if that happens often enough, long enough, you declare bankruptcy, either corporate or personal, and you go away and lick your wounds, and you try to do something else for a living. There's an aspect of that which really can't be learned in any other way. And again, back to academia, if you check all the boxes and do all the right things, you can do very, very, very well in an academic career without ever having a true failure. Maybe you didn't get the appointment you wanted, maybe you didn't get the promotion you wanted, but you never had to come home and say, honey, the paycheck just stopped. That typically doesn't happen in big organizations. Whereas in a startup, you're first saying, honey, I have to pay all of their paychecks, so our paycheck is stopping. So, we're writing checks to our employees out of our pockets. And then at a certain point, your pockets are empty. You say, we got to close the thing down. That's a very harsh lesson, but it makes for tougher and better entrepreneurs. Yeah, there's a category of failure, which is when you get venture investors. Okay, typically venture investors are pretty bright. They've had interesting experiences. They tend to have egos. I certainly do. And so we'll make an investment based on a story. That was always my discussion with entrepreneurs. Tell me a story, and then tell me a story. And I had about 3 different variations on this same failure, but I'll focus on one particular one. But I did the same dumb thing 3 times. The very technically competent entrepreneur came with a story. They convinced me that there was a market. They convinced me they could build a technology which would serve that market at an appropriate price point. They convinced me they had the right people to serve that market. We wrote a check. I wound up on the board as a director. And then something happened. And the world changed. The market changed around us, or our connection to that market changed. And the one I'm thinking about, like I said, I've got about 3 of these. But in one particular one, the thing that changed was the company had a distribution agreement with a Fortune 5 or Fortune 50, very large consumer electronics company. And so the business model that I and my other syndicate partners invested in was, we're going to build the technology, we're going to write the software, we're going to create the hardware, and then we're going to hand it off to this channel partner, and they're going to push it through 10,000 retail outlets with their name on it. And we'd take a cut. And that was a pretty good model. And in this case, that business partner changed their mind for reasons that had nothing to do with that. They exited the sector. It wasn't us. Wow. They just got rid of the whole sector. That they said, we're not playing in that sector anymore. But so here we are with the board meeting going, wow, that hurts. I mean, we already had the injection molded plastic cases for this electronics product with their logo, engraved in the injection molded plastic case. And it's like, well, that's not going to work. And here's where we as a board failed, is we didn't say, all right, let's take that piece of knowledge, combine it with all the other knowledge that we have, and decide, is this still a good investment going forward? We didn't do that. We said, well, we'll just have to sell it ourselves. We're going to put our own logo on it, and we're going to get it into 10,000 retail outlets, and we're going to, do marketing and advertising campaigns and direct mail, and oh, bless your heart, it hurts. After the point at which the business had a fatal event, after that point, we invested another $20 million, wow, in proving that it had been a fatal event. So yeah, I lost a lot of money on that deal, and some other. We literally had a Nobel Prize winner on our board. We had some very smart people on the board of this company, and yeah, we couldn't change our mindset that we had made an investment in a particular story, and then the world changed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's relevant to a whole bunch of companies right now. I don't know when your students are going to watch this, but we're recording this in June of 2020. The post-COVID world is going to be different. And I'm not sure how it's going to be different, but I know that it's different enough that some companies that raised money in the pre-COVID environment and are now struggling through working from home. You see the mess behind me. We're all trying to live on Zoom and Skype and what have you. As we emerge into a new normal, some of those sets of premises are going to be different now. Mm-hmm. And, yet some of those companies are going to fail. And what's incumbent on the entrepreneurs and what's incumbent on the investors is to recognize that early enough that they don't keep throwing good money after bad. Because I've done that, and boy, does that blow a hole in your rate of return for your venture capital fund when you're pumping money into a doomed company. That's not fun.
So you said you've made that same mistake 3 times.
I did it in three different markets because I'm a slow learner. Yeah, it's in one case the business partner just changed their mind just for their large gazillion-dollar company corporate reasons. They just changed their mind. In another one, I won't get into all the technical details, but basically we had bet on a particular technology standard, and it turned out the market went a different way. Mm-hmm. So we had built a product for one standard, and everybody started building for the other. And it was like, well, we're over here, and our product worked, and we won a national engineering award, and we got A+ certifications from all the laboratories that we went into, and at the end of the day, nobody bought any. So went broke. That was actually my first one. And then another one, we went into a market too early. We had, without getting into details, we had a tablet, my iPad, we had a tablet-based system for home nurses to get their orders for what they were going to do that day, where they were going to visit, what labs or what blood draws they were going to do, what tasks they were going to do, recording that information, and then sending it all back. This was pre-internet, okay? This was pre-everything, and it was just too early. And so, even though we built a great product, where the nurses said, "You will get this back from me when you pry it out of my cold dead hands," the CFOs of the hospitals, who were the ones who had to pay for it, were going, "Yeah, but you're holding, at that time, a $3,000 device that we have to equip every nurse with one of these, and you take it home and put it in your kitchen every night where the dog chews on it." That was not a sellable proposition. So that was one where I wouldn't say in that case the market changed. I say we didn't understand that market well enough. Mm-hmm. We'd been talking to the nurses. We'd been talking to the doctors. We were not talking to the insurance companies. We were not talking to the CFOs. We were not talking to the people that, a doctor might buy one for one nurse, but I needed to sell 10,000 of them. And and we pursued that one longer than we should have as well, because we just, if we just keep trying harder, we know we're right, and those foolish customers will eventually see that we're right. Yeah, that costs some money. So painful experiences.
So maybe I could finish up with a question that's a little bit more inflammatory, since you've talked a lot about kind of this difference between the public sector and maybe university setting. Should universities live in that privileged world? Should universities have that privileged kind of state that allows you to be in it without failing?
I'm a big believer in markets, and markets work. And there's a lot of people in the streets right now complaining about capitalism. Well, capitalism has dragged more people out of poverty and extended the lifespan of more people than any other theory in history. It works. And yeah, universities are very much in a non-capitalist bubble. In a wealthy society, in a healthy society, I have no problem with carving out, some bubbles of protection, because in those bubbles without, without a lot of risk of failure, without a lot of risk of personal consequence, people do have the intellectual freedom to pursue, so what happens if we put, a bunch of ruby atoms and stimulate them with microwaves and put a mirror on the end? And I don't know what the heck this thing's for, but it's kind of cool. And then 60 years later, how many lasers are within 10 feet of where I'm sitting? Well, I've got my iPhone. There's 30,000 pixels, so I got 30,000 lasers in this room. Does that sort of innovation happen in a purely market environment? I'd argue no. Where I started work was at Bell Laboratories, and your students won't know this, but it used to be there was only one phone company in the entire United States. It was a socialist monopoly of one phone company, and Bell Laboratories was the research division, and it got basically 1% of every phone bill in the country went to research. And so that organization was set up where a great portion of it was focused on immediate issues. Squirrels are chewing on our cables. How do we make squirrel-proof cables? Okay, well, that's immediate. But they also discovered the Big Bang. They also launched some of the first satellites. They invented the C programming language, the Unix operating system. All of that happened, not because of commercial pressures that we need to solve this problem for our customers, but this is intellectually interesting, and we're going to follow our intellectual curiosity. And there was at that time not a lot of pressure on them to show how's that going to make better telephones. Guess what? That world's gone. I was there for the tail end of it. It was an amazing, amazing place. And then for a lot of reasons, and we can talk about public policy and other things, for a lot of reasons that went away. And so now those corporate research laboratories that focus on the truly fundamental science and truly long-term research are mostly dead. Bell Labs is a shadow of itself. Watson Labs, which is IBM, is a shadow of its former self. DuPont Labs, a shadow of its former self. Microsoft Labs is actually one of the best examples right now, but even they tend to have a pretty close coupling to what are some products we're going to put on the marketplace. And so you say, well, who's going to do that research without commercial payoff? And you look to the universities. And so, yeah, I think there is a place for that. I don't agree that we should bow down to, and I both work at universities. I don't think we should bow down to professors saying, oh, they're better than us, oh, they're smarter than us. No, they've made different choices. They've made choices which lead them to certain sorts of success. And some of the spin-outs of that may lead back to this class, to innovation. But, I don't want to penalize them for those. I also don't want to give them too much credit for that either. The people, back to my definition of innovation, turning knowledge into money. The researchers turn money into knowledge. Now, typically a different person will take that knowledge created in a university environment and go bump that up against the marketplace and figure out a way to make money with it. And that person they deserve an awful lot of credit as well. They're the ones taking the risk. They're the ones that are, putting their, as I always said when I was running the incubator, they're putting their marriage and their mortgage at risk. And, they deserve a lot of credit for that. And when they win, and when they win big, and they make enough to buy a helicopter or to buy Peru, yay. Pay your taxes and go enjoy it. I got no problem with that. I have no problem with people, being very well compensated for that level of risk taking. We need to make sure there's room for all levels of success.
That's an outstanding way for us to finish up. I love that thought, that kind of showing where the market can really bear different levels of risk and why in the university setting things might be a little bit different.
This is a cliche. You absolutely learn more from the failures than from the successes. You really do.
I'd like to thank Stephen for taking the time to join us and share his stories, and also thanks to you for joining us on Innovation Out of Failure. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you'll check out all of my other interviews with amazing innovators. Once again, my name is Andrew Lyon. Thank you for listening.